What connects these three random things? Red fabric, a rather nice textured background from Westcott, and some sticks from my garden. Well, I'm going to use all three of these to create foreground blur. Now you might need to stick with me with this one whilst I explain it, but foreground blur is where you get a depth of field effect by putting things in front of your subject. Now, if you've tried this at home, what did you use? Was it something random? It was probably Christmas lights, but anything else, let me know down in the comments below. I think the easiest way to explain this is to actually have a go, starting with this background, I think. So let's get a light set, let's get a model in, let's get shooting, but more importantly, let's get some more sticks. Yes. So to help me out today, I've got the amazing Cara. Cara's going to be the model for this photo session, and I've started by making sure that my flash matches my camera. But actually, the first picture I'm going to take is a little bit different because I'm going to turn my flash off and use the default settings for this photo session. I'm going to be at 2,000th of a second. I'm going to be at f2.8, which is the one you're probably thinking about for depth of field. That's wide open for this particular lens. ISO 200, and when my flash doesn't fire, I get no flash, no picture. So I've got control of the rim lights for the rest of this session. So let's start by taking a picture of Cara like this. So Cara, I'm just going to take a picture. Here we go. And the end result is perfectly okay. Nothing wrong with this at all, except I've got no shallow depth of field whatsoever. Now, because I'm in a small home studio, the shallow depth of field bit comes from depth from your subject to the background. And I just don't have a lot of room to really maximize it. But there is another place where you can get blur, and that is actually in the foreground. So if I change one thing, I change me, I come around to the side, I should be able to include some foreground and get something a bit blurrier there. Let's see if this works. Here we go, Cara. And yeah, it doesn't really do much more. But to really make this work, I need to come right up against the background like this. So I'm going to take a nice picture with loads of foreground in my shot. And this time, yes, I do indeed have some blur in the foreground, but it's not as much as I would like. So there's one other factor that's in play here as well, and that's the focal length of my lens. The longer the focal length, the more blur you're going to get in the background and the foreground. So if I zoom in close to this lens maximum, which is only 40mm on a micro 4/3 camera, but nonetheless, here we go. It's enough to give me lots of foreground blur, and this is a great way to get that depth of field effect without having a lot of space. So I think we should take a few photos like this. So Cara, are you ready? Okay, let's take a few photos. The grey textured background, which I guess is technically the foreground, is simply there so I can see the depth of field effect much clearer than a white wall would show. So for the second setup, I've changed things around ever so slightly. I've moved Cara a bit further away from the background, which means if I want the shallow depth of field straight on picture, this is about as good as I can get in my small space. Now I could take this exact setup and make it even more blurry by getting a different lens, for example an f1.2 lens, but with this lens, that's as good as it gets. However, foreground blur can come in really useful, but to see it, I'm actually going to spin things around. So Cara, if you can go up against the wall, I'm going to spin this around. Okay, Cara is the same distance from the light as she was before, so in theory, the lighting should be exactly the same. Let's just take a test photo. Here we go. So we have a picture with clearly nothing out of focus. It is in focus right the way through. But remember, there's always foreground blur, so let's add something in the foreground. So I've got a whole bunch of different fabrics, and I'm going to use fabric to create my foreground blur. And there's several ways we could do this. The easiest way is just to literally hold it in front of the lens. So here we go. If there was ever a time for using face and eye detect on your camera, now is it. Okay, Cara, here we go. And immediately this becomes so blurry that you can't see the fabric, but it gives a nice gentle ethereal glow, which is all right, but it's not quite what we're after for this setup. So I'm going to do a little bit different work. I'm actually going to hold it slightly further away from the camera so it's a little bit clearer. Let's just try and find a part where it's not too thick. Here we go. So the top tip with this is to pre-focus. Focus on your subject's face and then bring in your fabric so you have a little bit of blur going on there. And keep mixing it up. Try to find different looks. And different fabrics will give different effects, so why not try a different fabric altogether? I've got this one, which is quite a lightweight fabric, but it has a two-tone look through it. The art with this is experimentation, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to use various fabrics in various ways. So Cara, are you ready? Okay, let's take a few photos like this. I think I'm going to try a different fabric first. I guess you could call this a fabric tunnel. It works really well to show that foreground blur, but it will also affect the light reaching Cara depending on the fabric that I'm using. As you can see, I've changed things around a bit for our last setup, so I've got some interesting props from the garden, and these are going to create a depth of field effect. But before I put them in, let's just start with the basic setup. I've changed everything around. It's a really good idea to double check everything is still working. So Cara, let's just take a little test photo, make sure this is good. And as you can see, Cara is in focus, and the twigs directly behind her, well, they're pretty much in focus as well, as you might expect. So this is going to be my foreground, and yeah, it's basically another stick. So the plan is, well, let me show you. Cara, I'm going to take a little test photo. I'm going to hold this in front of the camera, something like this, to create some nice out of focus foreground. But the trouble is, it works, but I've got a silhouette, and that's because we've got a single light. So to light the twigs in the foreground, I'm actually going to use a second flash. So I've got a Flashpoint Explore 100. It doesn't have to be a powerful flash, it's only got to light these little twigs. And remember, we're shooting pretty wide open here. So I've got that 1/4 power. I'm going to hold it right about there. Let's just see how this looks. And that looks pretty good. Now we have light on the foreground out of focus, and obviously light on Cara as well. But what we now need, something in the middle. Okay, I think that's okay. So what I've done is I've added some middle ground as well. So remember, I'm focusing on Cara. These are going to be a little bit soft, and then the one I'm going to hold, which is here, is going to be really soft. That's the idea. Let's just take a test photo, make sure this actually works. Cara, here we go. And having the one in the closest foreground in my hand is really useful, because this is the one I'm going to have to move around as we go. And I think that's pretty much perfect. So Cara, if you're ready, let's take a few photos like this. Here we go. And if you're wondering how I've attached all these twigs to the light stands, honestly, it was any clamp that did the job. So those photos came out really well. There is a bit of post-processing I've done on them. I've taken them into Nix software and added some toning. So there are lots of ways you can use foreground blur to really make your photos more interesting, and in a small studio, it's a great way to work. Now, if you've enjoyed this video or you've got any questions, leave me a comment down below. Click on the bell icon and you'll never miss a video right here on Adorama TV. And of course, if you haven't already done so, click on that subscribe button. I'm Gavin Hoey. Thanks for watching.